Hello everyone, Professor Krizlak here. So I wanted to make an upload talking about neoliberalism, something we've been talking about in class, but more broadly, I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. We've probably all heard, even before this class, even before this video, this phrase used in academic discussions, discussions about public policy, policy debates. And so let's think a little bit deeper about what that actually means. Is it just another way of saying capitalism? Is it just another way of saying the free market system? So let's dig deeper into kind of the conceptual ideas of neoliberalism, some of the main actors. And so by the time this video is done, hopefully we're on the same page about what we're talking about when we hear neoliberalism. So when we define it, one of the tricky things about neoliberalism is that there isn't really just one thing. Scholars often describe it as in different ways, they categorize it in different ways, but they usually describe it as having three dimensions. One, it is an ideology. This ideology that a belief that free markets are the best way to organize not only the economy, but society as a whole. So as an ideology, the belief that free markets are the best way to organize not only the economy, but society as well. So as a mode of governance, governments themselves begin to think and act like businesses, emphasizing efficiency, competition, decentralization of power, and performance metrics. Citizens are sometimes reframed as consumers, and government work is supposed to be looked at as through: is it efficient? Is it economically efficient? Is it does it promote competition? And so then it also is a policy package. It comes with deregulation of the economy, liberalization of the economy, and privatization of enterprises across the economy. Built into this as a policy package is this removal of barriers on businesses, open trade and finance, so global flows of capital can flow. And as we've seen, it also involves the sell-off of state-owned enterprises. So this is particularly important through different waves of neoliberalism. And as the Berlin Wall collapsed and the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, when economies started utilizing neoliberal policies, that state-owned enterprises had to be sold. So what we know then is that neoliberalism is both an economic project and a political project. It's about reshaping how we think of government's role in society, what we expect from citizens, and even how we define freedom. So to understand neoliberalism, we need to trace its ancestry. Its roots lie in classical liberalism, the ideas of thinkers like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, John Locke. So Adam Smith, who we've probably all heard of, who, while writing in the 18th century, induced this famous concept of the invisible hand. If individuals pursue their own self-interest in a competitive market, the result, unintentionally by any decision that we make, is the promotion of the common good. The state's role, to Adam Smith, was limited: enforce contracts, enforce property rights, and provide for national defense. David Ricardo, also emerges a generation later, built on this with his theory of comparative advantage. Even if one country is more efficient at producing everything in society, it benefits from trade because specialization increases overall productivity. So David Ricardo connected with this idea of comparative advantage. Classical liberalism was revolutionary in its time. It challenged mercantilism. Mercantilism, which was the system of state controlled trade designed to enrich monarchs and fund wars for the state. It also fit neatly with Enlightenment ideas of individual rights, freedom, and limited government. But classical liberalism came under pressure in the 20th century, especially during the Great Depression. The laissez-faire system failed to prevent mass unemployment, collapsing banks, and widespread suffering during the Great Depression. Into this crisis stepped John Maynard Keynes, who argued that markets don't automatically correct themselves. Sometimes, Keynes argued, government must spend money to stimulate demand, create jobs, and stabilize the economy. For decades after World War II, Keynesian economics defied economic policy across the West. Governments built welfare states, invested in infrastructure, supported unions, and taxed the wealthy at higher rates. This was the so-called golden age of controlled capitalism, roughly from 1945 to 1975. Growth was high, inequality was relatively low, and the middle class expanded. Even Republican presidents like Dwight Eisenhower accepted this framework. Richard Nixon once even famously said, "We are all Keynesians now." But by the 1970s, the Keynesian consensus was breaking down. Stagflation, the combination of high inflation and high unemployment, plus the oil shocks of the decade, left many people doubting whether state intervention could deliver prosperity. This created an opening for a revival of market-oriented thinking, but updated for a new global economy. Economists like Friedrich Hayek or Milton Friedman provided the intellectual framework and ammunition. Hayek, in The Road to Serfdom, warned that government planning was a slippery slope to tyranny. Friedman developed monetarism, arguing that controlling the money supply was the key to fighting inflation, and that government regulation only created distortions in the market. These ideas have stayed in the ivory tower of academia, but in the 1980s, they found powerful champions outside academia, in the policy-making sphere. Margaret Thatcher in the UK, Ronald Reagan in the United States embraced what was emerging out of academia. Thatcher privatized industries, broke the power of unions, and declared there is no alternative. Reagan cut taxes, deregulated industries, and embraced supply-side economics, promising that wealth would trickle down across society. This was the first wave of neoliberalism, a clear rejection of welfare capitalism that Keynes and followers of Keynes had built. This was also a bold reassertion of market supremacy over government intervention. The second wave, led by Bill Clinton, Blair, and the third wave. By the 1990s, neoliberalism had become so dominant that even center-left leaders adopted it. Bill Clinton in the US, Tony Blair in the UK, embraced what they called the third way. They accepted globalization, they accepted deregulation and free trade as givens, as the best way to run an economy. But they tried to pair those ideas with progressive social reforms. Clinton signed NAFTA, reformed welfare, and deregulated parts of the financial sector, but also expanded tax credits for the poor and invested in education. So pieces of the neoliberal model, but with a bit of a different flair. Blair pursued market-friendly reforms, but also pumped money into the National Health Service. This second wave showed neoliberalism's adaptability. It wasn't just a right-wing project, it became the default framework across the political spectrum. So, we know that these ideas spread around the world. Neoliberalism was spreading around the world. We saw it in the US, we saw it in the UK. We also saw it being spread around the world through the Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus became the template for development promoted by the IMF and the World Bank. Countries in Latin America, Africa, and Eastern Europe were told, if you want loans or aid, you must privatize, liberalize, and deregulate. In Chile, for example, under General Pinochet, shock therapy reforms guided by Chicago school economists privatized pensions, deregulated markets, and opened trade. In Eastern Europe, after the fall of communism, neoliberal reforms rapidly dismantled state ownership, brought about private property. In South Africa, after apartheid, the government adopted neoliberal economic strategies, even while trying to expand democracy. So supporters claimed these reforms brought modernization and growth. Critics argued they deepened inequality, weakened democracy, and tied countries' fates to global markets. So, we know that neoliberalism has never gone uncontested. From the start, critics warned that it overestimated market efficiencies and underestimates the importance of public goods and social safety nets. In the 1990s, anti-globalization protests erupted, most famously at the 1999 WTO summit in Seattle. Protesters argued neoliberalism trade policies were exploiting workers, destroying the environment, and undermining democracy. A quick YouTube search of WTO protests in 1999 will show you videos of demonstrators speaking out against these new policies being implemented. And of course, in 2008, during and after the global financial crisis, dealt another major blow. Deregulated financial markets created bubbles that nearly collapsed the global economy. Governments had to step in with massive bailouts and stimulus spending, ironically contradicting neoliberal orthodoxy, but were designed to save the economy and to save the global economy from collapsing. We also saw this with the COVID-19 pandemic, which raised similar issues. Could markets alone handle a public health emergency? Governments had to intervene heavily, funding vaccine research, sending out stimulus checks, and providing unemployment support. And the support in these policies were across the political spectrum. Both Democrats and Republicans supported these policies of propping up the economy in a way that maybe neoliberalism would speak out against. So these crises revealed some of neoliberalism's weaknesses, but they didn't fully dethrone it. Even after 2008, neoliberal assumptions about globalizations and free markets remained powerful. But even some of those fundamental traits of neoliberalism are coming to the forefront today, where some of these ideas are being criticized. And we know that one of the strongest critiques is that neoliberalism has increased inequality. Studies show that in the US, the top 1% captured a growing share of wealth since the 1980s. Middle and working class wages have remained stagnant, even as corporate profits soared. But globally, countries that embrace neoliberal reforms have seen growth, but the benefits might be uneven. Sometimes the elites and investors gaining far more than ordinary workers. But proponents of neoliberalism say that is lifting all boats, even if some are gaining more wealth than others. So this has fueled, though, some populist backlash, both on the left and the right. On the right, leaders like Donald Trump have criticized free trade deals and pushed economic nationalism. On the left, figures like Bernie Sanders and AOC from New York call for Medicare for all, stronger unions, and taxing the wealthy, while criticizing neoliberal policies. So in other words, the political polarization that we see in parties today is partly a reaction to neoliberalism's legacy. So, beyond inequality, neoliberalism faces challenges from technology and climate change. Tech companies grew in an unregulated environment, but now their power does raise to some questions about monopolies, privacy concerns, and democratic accountability. So, what you sometimes hear is, should markets be left alone, or do they need regulation? And then this issue, these same questions emerge when it comes to climate change. So, does neoliberalism favor market solutions to climate change? Well, we see the emergence of carbon trading. But others argue that the scale of the problem requires strong state intervention, not just market mechanisms. So, where does that leave us? Neoliberalism is found in many parts of both political parties in the US and around the world. So, it is this idea of free trade, of deregulation, this idea that markets can find the solution to problems. But we do know that there are criticisms. So, pros, cons of neoliberalism, and we will pick up there in the next video. Thank you.